Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
It is not being recorded. Please on record button.
Ma'am, recording button is on. Ma'am, recording is on.
It's okay. Please start your presentation.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It always seems impossible until it's done. Today, my topic of presentation is Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. The learning outlines are the introduction of MERS, history, its epidemiological triad, clinical features, complications, levels of prevention, and the recent advances. Learning outcomes. At the end of this presentation, my colleagues would have the understanding of MERS, its history, epidemiological triad, levels of prevention, and recent advances. What is Middle East Respiratory Syndrome? This syndrome belongs to the beta coronavirus genus. Coronaviruses are the large family of the viruses that cause a range of illnesses in humans, from a common cold to the severe acute respiratory syndrome. MERS was first identified in 2012 in Saudi Arabia. The largest outbreak of MERS COVID is outside the Arabian Peninsula occurred in South Korea in May 2015, resulting in 186 cases with 38 deaths. All the cases have had a direct or indirect link with the Middle East. Median age is 50 years, 64.5% were males. Majority of the patients experienced severe respiratory disease. Patient who died had a higher median age and proportion of male sex. Most patients had underlying comorbid conditions like chronic kidney disease, diabetes, and heart diseases. Here is the distribution of MERS COVID cases by placing reporting of 24 October 2013, starting from the Saudi Arabia and spreading to the other countries like UK, France, Germany, and Qatar. Coronavirus strains. There are 7 coronavirus strains as we have discussed in the previous presentations. Human coronavirus 229E, human coronavirus OC43, SARS-CoV-19, COVID, and human coronavirus NL63, human coronavirus HKU1, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, and COVID-19. Epidemiological triad. What is agents? The structure of the MERS virus is enveloped positive sense single-stranded RNA virus which enters the host by binding to the dipeptidyl peptidase 4 receptors. Host factors, age, highest risk for developing the MERS COVID are infants, children, elderly, and the pregnant females. Immunity, patient with immune system problems like comorbid conditions, chronic heart diseases, lungs, kidney problems, and diabetics are at high risk of having the disease than as compared to the patient having no immune compromise. Smokers are at in smokers there is high incidence of the disease as compared to non-smokers, and the patient who has traveled to the location that has had confirmed positive cases for the MERS COVID. In the genders, males are more prone to have the MERS infection as compared to females. Environmental factors like temperature, humidity, wind spread, food, water, sewage, inanimate objects are the cause of spreading the disease. Source, nasopharyngeal secretions, contaminated fomites, unpasteurized milk. MERS COVID remains stable at as an aerosol and at a low temperature, 20 degrees centigrade, and can be recovered after 48 hours. Fomites are a viable source of self-inoculation. MERS are more stable than the influenza virus in aerosols and on surfaces. Reservoir. The natural reservoirs are the bat and dromedary camels. Mode of transmission. The direct mode of transmission includes the coughing, sneezing by the infected patient, close personal contacts, and touching the shaking hands. And the indirect transmissions are by the contaminated objects or surfaces, and then touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Incubation period. The range of incubation period is about 5 to 14 days. The duration of hospitalization to discharge is 7 days, and to die about 9 days. Median time is 4 days. Pathogenesis. The virus enters the cells by attaching to the receptor DPP4 and causes the cytotoxic damage, release the inflammatory and immune cells, cytokines and chemokines, which leads to cytokine storm and cause the immunological injury, lead to multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. Clinical features. Clinical range from asymptomatic to very severe pneumonia. Respiratory symptoms include a fever, cough, dyspnea, tachypnea. Other systemic symptoms include myalgias and arthralgias. GIT symptoms in 1/3 of the patients having the MERS infection are the nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Complications. MERS infection can lead to acute respiratory distress syndrome, acute renal failure requiring hemodialysis, disseminated intravascular coagulation, pericarditis, multi-organ failure. Case fatality rate of the MERS infection is 30%. Now the levels of prevention. Primary level includes the health promotion and specific protection. In the health promotion, we educate the people about the use of masks, social distancing, hand washing, avoid touching nose, eyes, and mouth, or not to spread the germs by these activities. Specific protection includes a vaccination. Here, the recent advances in the vaccine development against the Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus, two proteins of the MERS-CoV, S and N proteins, were demonstrated to be highly immunogenic and capable of eliciting T-cell response. However, only S protein has shown to induce neutralizing antibodies, the critical effectors against the MERS infection. Among the 6 types of the vaccine, which is discussed in the article, are focused on the viral vector-based and the subunit vaccines. Types of vaccines are viral vector-based vaccine, DNA vaccine, subunit vaccine, virus-like particles-based vaccine, inactivated whole virus vaccine, and the live attenuated vaccine. Even though many promising vaccine candidates have been proposed and reported, but only 3 potential vaccines have been progressed to the phase 1 clinical trials, which includes the DNA vaccine and the 2 viral vector-based vaccines. Secondary prevention includes the early diagnosis and prompt treatment. The main test for the MERS infection is the PCR, which is followed after by specific confirmatory test. According to WHO, nasopharyngeal swabs are less sensitive than the specimens of the lower respiratory tract. Upper respiratory tract specimens can be taken from the nasopharyngeal or the oropharyngeal, while the lower respiratory tract samples include the bronchoalveolar lavage, tracheal aspirates, and the pleural fluid. Here is the WHO criteria for the patients under investigation for the MERS infection, who should be investigated. Any patient having the severe acute respiratory illness or the pulmonary parenchymal disease and either of it and travel history to the Middle East within the last 14 days or in the clusters within the last 14 days and the healthcare workers exposed to the patient with the severe lower respiratory tract infection and the patient unexpected clinical course and unexplained by the current etiology. And any patient having the acute respiratory infection of any severity with the close contact with confirmed and the probable MERS infection within the 14 days. The patients in the Middle East and any ventilated patient. Treatment. There is no specific antiviral treatment for the MERS infection. We only provide the supportive treatment to the patient according to the signs and symptoms. Tertiary prevention of the complications and the death by the early diagnosis and prompt treatment. Surveillance. WHO first published surveillance in 2012 recommendations for the Middle East respiratory coronavirus infection, which was updated in June 2018 version about the background information and the links to WHO case reports and initial interview forms has been added. Objectives of the surveillance. The primary objectives of the surveillance are to detect the early cases of MERS infection, clusters, and any evidence of sustained human-to-human transmission, and to determine the risk factors and geographical risk areas for the infection with the virus. Case definitions for the surveillance. A person with an acute respiratory infection with a history of fever and cough and indications of pulmonary parenchymal disease based on the clinical or radiological evidence who requires admission to the hospital with no other etiology that fully explains the clinical presentation. Confirmed cases are those a person with the laboratory confirmation of MERS-CoV infection irrespective of the clinical signs and symptoms. And the probable case, febrile acute illness with clinical, radiological, or histopathological evidence of pulmonary parenchymal disease and direct epidemiological link with the laboratory confirmed MERS cases. And the testing of the MERS is unavailable and negative on a single inadequate specimen or inconclusive result. Research and development blueprint for the action to prevent the epidemics. In May 2015, the 68th World Health Assembly welcomed the development of a blueprint in consultation with member states and the relevant stakeholders for accelerating the research and development in epidemics or health emergency situations where there are no insufficient preventive and curative solutions, taking into account other relevant team streams within the WHO. In December 2015, WHO workshop to identify the elements to be used to prioritize the disease and to agree on the initial list of the disease to be urgently addressed under the Research and Development Blueprint. Is a list of the priority pathogens, which includes the highly pathogenic emerging coronavirus relevant to the humans, MERS, COVID, and the SARS. The WHO research and development blueprints for the MERS have called for 3 types of the vaccines: dromedary camel vaccines to prevent the zoonotic transmission, human vaccine for the long-term protection of persons at the high exposure risk, and the human vaccines for the reactive use in outbreak setting. Here is an article on the advances in the MERS COVID vaccines and the therapeutics based on the receptor binding domain. The receptor binding domain of the S protein contains a critical neutralizing domain and is an important target for development of the MERS vaccines and therapeutics. In the development of the MERS COVID receptor binding domain based vaccines and therapeutics, we are facing a potential challenges and many strategies are being following to improve their efficacy. An article on neutralizing monoclonal antibodies as a promising therapeutic against the Middle East respiratory syndrome coronavirus infection. There are no approved vaccine or the therapeutics until now. Passive immunotherapy with the neutralizing antibodies is an effective prophylactic and therapeutic agent against the emerging viruses. The current advances in the neutralizing antibodies against the COVID is a major target, and mouse, camel, and the human-derived neutralizing antibodies targeting the receptor binding domain have been developed. But there is a major problem with the antibodies therapy is the mutant escape under the selective pressure, which can be solved by the combination of neutralizing monoclonal antibodies targeting different epitopes. Is a systemic review of the MERS-CoV seroprevalence and RNA prevalence in the dromedary camels implications for the animal vaccination. Most adult dromedaries in the Africa and the Middle East have been infected with the MERS-CoV. Qualitative synthesis determined that the MERS seroprevalence increased with age up to 80 to 100% in the adult dromedaries. Epidemiological characteristics of the MERS must be considered in the design of the MERS-CoV animal vaccination strategies. Cows are likely to play a central role in sustaining circulation of the MERS and should be targeted for the potential dromedary vaccination. Now the global trends. In the 20th Feb 2018, 2,182 cases of MERS-CoV infection with 779 deaths in 27 countries were reported to WHO worldwide, with the most being reported in the Saudi Arabia, about 1,807 cases with 705 deaths. This is a graph which shows the confirmed global cases of the MERS infection in 18 September 2018. The dark blue color shows the cases in the Saudi Arabia, which is up to 110 in highest peak in 2014. And the red color shows the cases in the Republic of Korea, highest peak about 90 to 95 in Republic of Korea. Here are the references from WHO and CDC. Thank you. Now the multiple choice questions. The animal which is a suspected carrier of
B,
MERS.
camel.
B. Camel.
Which of the following is true regarding the MERS? MERS usually affects the individual who have the pre-existing disease like diabetes. People visiting Saudi Arabia are advised to have the vaccine 1 month before travel. MERS can be cured with antibiotic amoxicillin. Symptoms of MERS appear within a day following the contact with an infected patient.
A.
A.
MERS is an abbreviation of mucosal
B.
influenza respiratory.
B.
Middle East.
MERS outbreak was first
B.
identified.
E. Saudi Arabia.
B.
The MERS virus is double-stranded DNA, single-stranded
B.
enveloped RNA virus.
B.
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 Single stranded enveloped.
How to define probable case in the MERS occurrence? Febrile acute respiratory illness, it's a radiological histological examination, or a patient with antibiotic confirmation of MERS infection, a patient with respiratory infection confirmed on radiology and laboratory finding, patient with
A.
respiratory illness but
A.
no
A.
it's a potential MERS vaccine candidates are better progress to phase 1 clinical trials are the DNA vaccine,
A.
genetic
A.
holds.
A. A.
Case fatality rate of the MERS
B.
B. 30%.
B. 30%.
The largest outbreak of the MERS COVID was in the Arabic Peninsula back in 2015.
B. South Africa.
A.
It's BU, South Africa. MERS virus spread easily.
C.
C. Beta.
Beta coronavirus.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is a very informative presentation by Dr. Maida. Dr. Maida, please announce the results.
Ma'am, Dr. Sadia or Dr. Hansa? First pe
Very
ask me.
nice. Okay. Congratulations, Dr. Sadhi and Dr. Hansa. Today we have talked about MERS. I have one very important question for you people. That the London 1 novel COVID virus 2012. What do you know about its similarities with MERS? Dr. Maida, would you please answer this query?
Ma'am, nahi pata.
Okay. We already talked about the MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, and that is caused by coronavirus. The same virus in 2012, it was reported in London. That was named as London 1 novel coronavirus 2012. Later on, it was found. Please, everybody, mute your mic, please. However, it is very important to note that later on it was found that London 1 novel coronavirus 2012, it is the same virus as MERS. So it is Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome virus that has traveled to London through air routes. And some of the air routes has been shown in the presentation. And these air routes, they were responsible for spreading of MERS to London. So once it reached London, their public health system and their surveillance system, they became active and they detected it as a novel virus. And they named it as London 1 novel coronavirus 2012. Later on, it was detected that it has the same species as that of MERS. The second important thing as we know that after Arabian Peninsula, the most important country that has been affected was South Africa. In the South Africa, again, MERS causes lot of morbidity and mortality. And after the Arabian Peninsula, the South Africa has a great burden of disease. Another important thing that I want to mention here was the remdesivir. Anybody who want to add about the use of remdesivir in coronaviruses? Dr. Vaida, would you please let us know more about how the remdesivir has been studied and how the research has taken place for the role of remdesivir in coronavirus disease?
मैम यही है कि ये एंटीवायरल है बस और तो
Very right. Very right. It is an antiviral that was first studied in Ebola virus disease. And later on, it has been a lot of research of the role of remdesivir. As we know, the coronavirus disease, COVID-19, again, that is caused a global epidemic. The remdesivir emerged as one of the important candidate for research. And there was the use of remdesivir in many centers. Some of them showed promising results, and the probability of having the lesser mortality with remdesivir than the rest of the antiviral agents that were being used. One of very important statement was given from US, from the CDC, that remdesivir was believed to decrease the hospital stay. Later on, WHO collected data from multi-center from all over the world, and it was found that remdesivir has no significant decrease in mortality due to coronavirus disease. The first use of remdesivir was in Ebola virus, as reported in research, and there are many studies that have shown the use of remdesivir even in MERS virus. So the again one of the important findings about the different use of antivirals, we can trace its history to different coronaviruses, especially to MERS, SARS-CoV-1, and SARS-CoV-2. I think if there is any other question, you are most welcome to discuss here. Okay, thank you very much for a very patient listening, and it is a very good presentation, and many important aspects has been covered so far, recent advances, everything about the MERS virus in such a detail. I think we can close our class here.
Thank
See
you,
you
ma'am.
next time. Allah Hafiz, and
Allah Hafiz.
God bless.
Thank you.